So we've been covering the ballot measures in all the different states that have ballot measures on the show. And we've now made it to Oregon, which is pretty interesting state. So Oregon, this is how ballot measures work in this state. Citizens of Oregon may initiate legislation as either a state statute or a constitutional amendment, both through direct means. Meaning, after a successful petition drive, it goes straight to the ballot, although it has to weigh in on to pass or ratify. In Oregon, citizens also have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum. The Oregon State Legislature may also place measures on the ballot as legislatively referred constitutional amendments or legislatively referred state statutes with a majority vote of each chamber. Single subject rule. In Oregon, each proposed measure must address only one subject. This means you can't have, a lot of states have this rule, you can't have a ballot measure that actually covers two subjects and you just loop that as like one measure. You can't combine for Oregon. We're going to go down here to number of signatures. The number of signatures required to qualify for the ballot. The number of signatures required in Oregon is tied to the number of votes cast for the office of governor in the state's most recent gubernatorial election. 8% for initiated constitutional amendments, 6% for initiated state statutes, and 4% for veto referendum. Deadlines. Petitions are scheduled biannually? Is this supposed to be biannually, Roger? I think this is supposed to be biannually. And petitioners have approximately 2 years to circulate petitions and must be submitted 4 months prior to the next regular general election. Supermajority. Only ballot measures that propose changing vote requirements require a supermajority. Passed in 1998, Oregon Ballot Measure 63 amended the state constitution to require that. This provision also applies to legislatively referred ballot measures. Okay, let's get to the measures. Oregon Measure 111, Right to Healthcare Amendment. Now, I was really curious about this one. This is not Medicare for all, FYI, guys. This is not Medicare for all, but it's the right to healthcare. So this one I was interested in. It says a yes vote supported amending the state constitution to require that the state ensure that every resident of Oregon has access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable healthcare as a fundamental right. So this goes to define cost-effective, right? What does the state consider to be cost-effective? So you got to think about this for a second. This measure passed by 50.73%. So that was close. It goes on to say the amendment required that the state to balance the obligation of ensuring a right to health care against funding public schools and other essential public services. The amendment stated that legal remedies for lawsuits brought against the proposed section may not interfere with the balance between a right to health care and funding other essential public services. So let's see who supported this. Democrat politicians supported it, including U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. Let's go on here. Some of the unions that supported it: Oregon AFL-CIO, Oregon Academy of Family Physicians, to name a few. Organizations: ACLU of Oregon, League of Women Voters of Oregon, to name a few. One of the arguments was Oregon can ensure this fundamental right with a proven cost-effective system. Again, I would say define cost-effective. Countries around the world have implemented single-payer healthcare systems that meet these criteria with simplified, transparent practices and greatly expanded patient choice. These countries spend less per person than the complex U.S. system, and they got better health outcomes. Well said, Charles. Who opposed? Republican politicians, including State Senator Fred Girod. Here's one of the arguments. This requires that the state to force some people to provide health care to others. See how they frame this? It means that the state will have to send doctors and nurses to remote areas at a salary set by the state to give everyone their right to health care. Let me say something about this real quick. Would that be the case if there were hospitals in these rural areas? Would that be the case if people actually had family practice, facilities everywhere, even in those remote areas? That's part of the problem. After all, if you have a right to have health care, how are you going to get it if someone else doesn't give it to you? This is the dumbest thing. Oh my God. Oh my God, this doesn't make any sense. This guy's ridiculous. This woman, excuse me, this is Kim Wallen. In fact, to those obligated to provide the service and to those obligated to pay for it, it is the opposite of a freedom. It is coercion. Supporters say that this measure does not force the state to spend any money on it and that the courts cannot force it to. They know healthcare for all equals the entire state budget. So they essentially say that it's only a virtue signal with no strings attached. Kim, this is the dumbest shit. I'm sorry. It's just stupid. People actually arguing about giving people health care. Give me a break. Campaign finance money. So there was over $800,000 spent to support this measure and no money spent to oppose it. That's very important in reference to cash contributions. And then, but when you go here, under support, it says the following table includes contribution expenditure totals for the committee in support of the initiative. So it shows you how that comes up with that, over that $800,000. But we've shown this before about these ballot initiatives. Typically, the ones that have the most money spent towards it, those are usually the ones that win, right? So there was a lot of money spent to support this. I will say that. Commentary from Roger Meadows here. Yo, Marco, I know you are watching. What's going on with your fellow Oregonians? Is that what they called it? Oregonians, man. Ratification of 50.8%. Nearly half of y'all don't think you have a right to health care. Holy crap, Sabby. Did you see what Representative Kim Wallen said? That's the one I just read. She was like, you mean the state is expected to take care of people who lack the resources? I swear these people need a serious lesson on the government is supposed to look out for everyone's welfare, not to mention promote it. As it says in the preamble, well, the people have spoken, but at least we got to see where the people are directly without some politician standing in the way. This is why I never felt comfortable with national polls that said single payer has a 73 approval rating. You cannot truly have an honest accounting of where people are on this issue if you do not do a state by state basis, which is why every state in the country needs to be a citizen ballot initiative state. Even though this was not a citizen ballot initiative, but was a legislative initiative put forth to the people for a vote. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but it's true. If you really want to know how the people feel on the issues, then we have to vote on the issues. And not everyone lives in a ballot initiative state. I'm in Massachusetts. We are a BI state. So when I go to vote, I do get to vote directly on issues, not just for politicians, right? But every state should have that right. That's how you see where the voters actually stand. We don't do that nationally in this country. We elect politicians and hope that they do the right thing. And that's why a lot of us are still left behind. Oregon Measure 112 removes slavery as punishment for crime from the Constitution Amendment. A yes vote supported repealing language from the state constitution that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishment and adding language that authorizes an Oregon court or probation or parole agency to order alternatives to incarceration for a convicted individual as part of their sentencing. This measure was ratified by 55.59%. So this was a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. So let's go on here. Who approved this? So it was actually bipartisan support, mainly Democrats, but there were a couple of Republicans that supported this as well. So that's interesting. 3 Republicans supported it. Unions, Oregon Education Association, Oregon Nurses Association, some of the organizations, Planned Parenthood, Advocates of Oregon, Urban League of Portland. One of the arguments that was made, voting yes on Measure 112 will still allow important rehabilitation and accountability programs to continue. Prison work programs are a part of rehabilitation efforts for those serving time. Our current system includes mandated and voluntary work programs. Passing Measure 112 will clean up our state constitution while allowing these programs to continue. Additionally, important programs offered as part of sentencing, probation, or parole, including education, counseling, treatment, and community service, will still continue if Measure 112 is passed. Interesting. Who was opposed to this? Oregon State Sheriff's Association. Of course. Of course they would oppose it. One of the arguments, Oregon sheriffs do not condone or support slavery and or involuntary servitude in any form. With this being said, Oregon sheriffs cannot support Measure 112 as drafted. It creates unintended consequences for Oregon jails that will result in the elimination of all reformative programs and increased costs to local jail operations. Oregon sheriffs do not condone or support slavery and or involuntary servitude. Oh, this is on here twice for some reason. That's weird. Okay, so that was one of the arguments against it. Campaign money that was spent, there was over $1 million that was spent to support it. There was no money spent to oppose it. So again, as we've seen before, usually when there's a lot of money spent, the measure is usually going to go with the money. So we're going to go to the next one. Oregon 113, exclusion from re-election for legislative absentee initiative. So a yes vote supported disqualifying legislators from re-election following the end of their term if they are absent from 10 legislative floor sessions without permission or excuse. This was ratified by 68.32%. So in other words, for the politicians that don't like to show up, they want you to leave, basically. Interesting, Oregon. Okay, so it goes on to say, I was looking to see if anyone supported. No one supported. Okay, sorry about that. There's no names mentioned to see who supported it or who opposed it. But I do want to add this part here. The campaign contribution, like the money that was spent, there was over $2 million that was spent to support it, and there was no dollar spent to oppose it. This was really interesting. And so there is a comment here from Roger. Depending on which side of the spectrum you are on, this could be a good thing or a bad thing. Remember in 2011 when Democrat senators from Wisconsin walked out so Republican senators could not have a corner to pass Governor Scott Walker's union busting law, where they fled the state to neighboring Michigan. They were hiding out in the champion Ed Schultz is covering them. Teacher union families were begging for Obama to put on his comfortable pair of walking shoes and come to show support. As we know, it never happened, and Scott Walker got his union busting bill passed. Now, a decade later, they are seeing and experiencing its unpopularity and are beginning to try to repeal. However, in a twist since that legislation passed, Wisconsin, according to Forbes, went from being at the bottom of the list at 49 in public school education to number 9. So maybe there was something to it. We're moving on to this measure, Oregon 114, changes to firearm ownership and purchase requirements initiative. A yes vote supported this balloted initiative too, require permits issued by local law enforcement to buy a firearm, require photo ID, fingerprint, safety training, criminal background check, and fee payment to apply for a permit, and prohibit manufacturing, importing, purchasing, selling, possessing, using, or transferring ammunition magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds to and make violations a Class A misdemeanor. This measure passed narrowly. It passed by 50.65%. So that was very, very close. So this is a change here in reference to firearm ownership in Oregon. But again, very close. Very close. Who supported it? Mainly Democrats. U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley, State Senator Case Chama, State Representative Tana Sanchez. Interesting. Former U.S. Rep Gabrielle Giffords also supported it. The Oregon Progressive Party, AFT Oregon, Oregon Medical Association, and Oregon Nurses Association, and Everytown for Gun Safety, the League of Women Voters of Oregon, and Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety. One of the arguments for it, the League of Women Voters of Oregon believe that the proliferation of handguns and semi-automatic assault weapon poses a major health and safety threat to Oregonians. Is that what they're called? Oregonians? Gun violence, the leading case of premature death in the U.S., should be confronted with a sense of urgency and a range of evidence-based solutions. Here is why the League strongly supports Measure 114. Research shows that a permit to purchase requirement is one of the most effective ways to reduce firearm homicide and suicide rates. So this is huge. I don't know if any of you watching live in Oregon, but if you do, I'm curious how you feel about this, because like I said, this measure barely passed, but it passed. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. That should be at National Hip Hop Museum in DC. Thank you so much for that. Okay, thank you. Again, I can't put super chats on the screen because StreamYard did not refresh the comments. It's really weird. I don't have new comments on StreamYard since 5:52. I don't know what happened to StreamYard. Anyway, we'll go ahead and finish up here. Who opposed it? Of course, the Sheriff Association, Oregon State Shooting Association, Portland Socialist Rifle Association, National Rifle, the NRA, of course, Oregon Firearms PAC, and Oregon Hunters Association. And one of the arguments was one of the major impacts it will have is the overall cost. The measure only accounts for a $65 charge for the process, but the major issue the sheriff's office will be impacted by is having to hire at least one additional employee to handle this new process. You might ask, why is hiring another person a big deal? Under the current budget, there is no money to do this. And if it passes, the sheriff's office will be considering a reduction in patrol staff to meet the mandate. The money's there. I'm sorry. There's plenty of money to go around. Money's just being used in different ways, in some places where it should not be. Heavily spent in some areas and not spent enough in others. Miss me with all the we don't have the money shit. Sorry. How much money was spent in reference to campaign finance? There was over $3 million spent to support it and over $187,000 spent to oppose it. Again, usually if you follow the money, that's usually where the measure will go. And that is the rest of Oregon, ladies and gentlemen.